am slowly calling people back so that we can start in a minute. No, that we can start right now with uh, Marianne Cullinan's presentation on deprogramming Indiana Jones, anti-colonialist DMing with kids. So you have the stage.
Hello, I'm Marianne Cullinan, and I'm super excited to be here and see some familiar faces and some new ones. And it's 8 a.m. here, so there's a non-zero chance that a sleepy teenager will wander through my screen at some point. So bonus points if you catch one. So I'm here to talk about anti-colonialist DMing with kids. And my quick agenda is to talk a little bit about what colonialism and anti-colonialism are, why it matters in role-playing games, and then some practical ways we can do some table culture and some fictional moves we can do to help students with this. So just to start out with a little bit of context, I live in New Hampshire in the United States, and hi, honey. Can you go the other way? Oh, there we go. First one. Please go the other way. Thanks. And we are primarily, I have 10 to 14-year-olds. These are some of my students. We have 45 of them this year in our role-playing game club, and they are primarily peer-led. And we are primarily white, middle-class, rural, Christian, monolingual people who live in small towns. And so what is colonialism? So colonialism is a practice of domination which involves the subjugation of one people to another. And in America, we, as you may be aware, have some trouble with a history of American exceptionalism and white supremacy, systemic racism, misogyny, homophobia. It's in our textbooks, it's in our mass media, it's in our politics. And my students don't have much of an opportunity to have any other competing narratives for this. But anti-colonialism is a framework where people are actively resisting and dismantling the ideologies of colonialism that one group of people is better than the other, both explicitly and implicitly. And so why is this important? So in role-playing games, I have a couple quotes here that I really like. And role-playing games with children give us an opportunity to help them experiencing adventure and danger while decentering themselves and becoming more morally aware of others around them. And this is really important for my cohort of children, everyone. And then I love Nell Noddings. She wrote a book called Care, and among many others. And a lot of her thoughts about moral development in children and everyone is this idea of to what degree am I responsible for my own actions and to what extent am I responsible for the things others do as a result of how I've treated them. And role-playing games with children, in my context, really allows them to explore these things in a way that they may not get to in other aspects of their life. This is important because, as you may be aware, there is a history in Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games in general of there being some questionable colonialist and racist source material and practices. And I'm thinking about the Drow, and I'm thinking about some of these early and not so early adventure modules, and even back to Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. There's a lot of evidence that he had at least appropriate for the age racism as compared to his contemporaries where he lived. And so we're coming out of some flawed material and a culture that may not be exactly the way that we would wish that it would be. But we have some things that we can do to help children instead of perpetuate these sort of implicit colonialist behaviors and ideologies. We can do some pretty simple things that will allow us to help children and ourselves and everyone really do some things that will help them directly work for anti-colonialism. So first I'm going to talk about the table culture, which is what we do amongst ourselves out of the fiction as the players at the table. And then I'm going to talk about some moves that we can make in our fictional world to also support this work. So the very first thing that we have at our table are norms. And norms are agreements between all of us of how we are going to try to conduct ourselves. And one of the things that is really helpful about having norms is that we can return to them when we're not displaying the behaviors that we wish that we were. And they're different than rules because it's things that we want to do, not things that we're not allowed to do. And because we are a peer-led group, primarily, we start with good leaders need good followers and good followers need good leaders. To back up a tiny bit, if we're thinking about perspective taking for other cultures and other peoples who have experiences that are different than ours, before we start that as 10 to 14-year-olds, we need to start with how do we do that with the other people at our own table? How do we respect other people's ideas? How do we respect other people's perspectives? And good leaders need good followers is the idea that I can't actually make anyone do anything. If you're choosing to stay after school on a Friday afternoon to play these games with us, then you need to choose to allow these games to happen and be part of what we're doing. And then the mirror of that is if you are leading the group, you need to be prepared, ready to go, thoughtful about the people who are paying attention to what you are asking them to do. Actions have consequences in game and in real life. So one of the reasons that the Indiana Jones series is so compelling, I think, is that there's very little consequences. Indiana Jones always ends up with a girl. He always ends up with the stuff. He always gets away. And we never see what happens for the rest of it, right? This may belong in a museum, is what he would say. I do notice that the things that belong in the museum have the tendency to be very expensive and made out of gold. Maybe they could just stay where they were with the peoples who already had them. But in real life, actions have consequences for people, even if they're not consequences you see. And so in our games, we remind people that the behaviors they have at the table and the behaviors they have within the fiction have an impact and a repercussion beyond just this one moment of enjoyment for them. We also, you may play any character you wish, but your character has to want to be part of the story. They are not allowed to work against the group. And we are all here to have fun. So when we come back to a place where maybe we're not having fun because there's conflict, we can come back to this idea, hey, we're all here to have fun. So let's figure out a way that we can. I am so delighted to build off of what Bea said earlier in these support tools. They are incredibly important for everyone, and especially, I think, for children who are learning about perspective taking. And if nothing else happens out of the work that I do, I'm hoping that children will understand what a positive table culture is. So when they move out into the world, they know how to advocate for themselves and others at the table. And so the very first thing we do is we use something called Session Zero, which is, as probably many or all of you know, a conversation before we start the game. What do you want your characters to be able to accomplish during this? What are you hoping will happen? What is the rating of this game? Is it G, PG, PG-13? We can't go higher than that. We're in a middle school, right? And laying some ground rules about expectations of how will we pay attention? What will we do if we need a break? What are our tools that are going to help us pay attention? And then we've talked a little bit about X-Card in the chat. We talked about it in Bea's presentation. And in our case, X-Card is very useful because it allows children to erase their own mistakes. When you are 10 to 14 years old and you are trying to role play and be social and do all these things with a lot of neurodiverse students at our table, and often when they X card something, they're actually X carding themselves because they've said something in a way that they didn't anticipate it coming out. And we do it with some humor where they take their fingers and make a little buzzing noise. And it's been really amazing to see this spread beyond our role playing game community into our community at large in our middle school. And so when someone is making someone else uncomfortable with what they're saying, they'll just make a little X card in their face and go, eh, and everybody laughs. And it's a socially acceptable way to say, hey, could you not? In a way that's very challenging for this group developmentally. And then we do lines and veils ahead of time. This idea that you would communicate about what would be comfortable for you and what would be comfortable for other people and what is not is kind of a novel idea for a lot of our kids, and it's really important. And things like veils are very important, right? What do we want to not see at all? And then what maybe do we want to touch on? Things like flirting or kissing are very important to talk about ahead of time when you are 11, and always. And then really just trying to have the culture of open communication and that conversation. I see in your face that maybe this is something that makes you uncomfortable. How can we have this conversation together? This is really important as a foundation for anti-colonialism, because how can we do this for other people or fictional people when we can't even do it for each other? So how do we purposefully create an anti-colonialist fiction? And so within the fictional sphere, I think one of the most important things we can do for students is, instead of railroading them through a dungeon where they're just sort of murdering things, we give them ethical dilemmas and multiple solutions. I am not saying that we are pacifists. Part of the fun of role-playing games as a child is the sense of power and being able to run through the world with a big sword. But having ethical dilemmas and well-rounded characters and multiple possible solutions at least allows for children to have many different conversations about what would be the best thing to do before they decide what it is, versus the story deciding that. Back to actions have consequences, right? Actions have consequences outside of the fiction, but it's really important that they have consequences within the fiction. If you burn down the orphanage, you need to go to jail or have some sort of consequence within the town, right? It's not just the next scene and we're off to a new location, so we never see that orphanage again. And we believe pretty strongly that no humanoids are inherently evil or disposable as an entire race, right? Maybe we have some big bad evil dudes, and that's part of the fun, but that doesn't mean every goblin is evil or every orc is evil or anything like that. And when someone kills a low-level goblin guard, I always have them loot the body so they can see the picture they keep in their pocket of their 16 children and the check that they have written out to the Goblin Girl Scouts funding their new building, and how they work, for minimum wage, extra hours so their child could go to piano camp or whatever. And it's just this idea that every action you have that you do has a consequence, whether it's good or bad. And so everyone has value. And speaking of that, every character should have reasons for their actions. This book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, is fantastic. And it's this idea that even the big spider in the dungeon, why is it attacking you? Is it hungry? Is it protecting its eggs? Why is that goblin guard guarding this random door? Is he trying to send his children to piano camp? And so when you know that every character has reasons for their behavior, it allows for negotiation. It allows for different kinds of ideas. If the goblin guard's getting paid minimum wage, he's probably not going to be as keen to lay down his life, right? And that allows you to have these conversations that are a little more nuanced. And in that same way, we need to let our player characters have time to be and develop as characters. What do they want beyond just being an adventurer? Beyond just going through dungeons and killing people and stealing other people's grandma's treasures? What are their motivations? Every single middle schooler's backstory is tragic, and they are all orphans, and they are all tabaxis, rogues. or dragonborn barbarians. But beyond their tragic backstory, how, what do they like to eat? What does their bedroom look like? Right? What is their motivation? What are the things they care about? And once they have that understanding of their characters, that allows them to interact with the fictional world in a much more nuanced way. And in the end, maybe they still kill everything, but at least they have thought about why. It's incredibly important as the people designing the world to take a step back and just think about why our world, our fictional world, is designed the way that it is. Are we perpetuating tired, racist, misogynist, colonialist tropes for no reason within the fiction? If there are things that you need within the fiction, especially if you're going to turn it on its head and have that ethical dilemma, fine. But every single D&D game does not have to be the pretend Middle Ages in Europe with, the mean king and the poor peasants and all that, right? We can design our world to be anything we want. And so we should. And for students, as adults, we may want to have some sort of grim, dark campaign where everybody dies and, but for students who are still working through all of these things, sometimes we can keep it whimsical. They are just as happy to fight a calzone golem in Something's Cooking, which is a great little module, as they are to have some sort of, grim, dark experience with child slavery. And this allows them to be silly and have fun and work as a team. And so those are the things that are really important. And this perspective taking and being able to work with other people at the table and within the fiction are the skills that are going to help them become successful and thoughtful adults. So ultimately, I want to go back to that quote. Playing role-playing games with children gives an opportunity to help them experience an adventure and danger while decentering themselves and becoming more morally aware of others around them. And given that, we have a responsibility to be purposefully thoughtful about the way that we construct their fictional universe and the way that we teach them to interact with each other at the table. And by doing these things, this is how we start to deprogram Indian midjobs. And that's it. Here are some sources for images and things that were in my presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's already a good discussion going on the Discord, including
Awesome. I
that
can't wait
people
to join it.
want to read Monsters Know What They're Doing, and that the X card would be very helpful in real life. So
Yes.
for time reasons, I have to direct everyone to Discord now so that we can continue with our final presentation of today. But thank you again, Marianne.